Irmgard Bartenieff was a dancer, a German expressionistic dancer in the 20s and 30s in Germany. And she studied with Laban, who was a real sort of Renaissance man. He was an architect, a painter, a real movement looker. He looked at movement, he analyzed movement, he thought about movement. He was a theater man at his heart. And he was the initiator of many ideas to do with looking at both the expressive side of movement and the artistic, functional, anything that had to do with movement he was interested in. He also generated all of the ideas around Laban notation and kinetography. So he was an ideas man, basically, and he began many schools and different people who developed his thoughts. Irmgard Bartenieff was one of his disciples for a while, although she didn't study with him that long. She only studied with him for a few years. And then she, having a Jewish husband, had to leave Nazi Germany, and she got the last boat in 1938 and went to New York. And being an expressionistic German dancer was not a popular profession in New York in the 1940s, so she had to think of something else to do. She had a family to support, children to bring up, so she trained as a physiotherapist, and she combined the knowledge of movement that she got from Laban with her physiotherapy training and came up with the Bartenieff fundamentals, which includes the Laban theory of space harmony, of effort, and shape. Irmgard worked in the polio wards with children, and it was really that work, I think, that got her bringing the Laban effort and shape work into the functional aspects of movement. So these children couldn't sit up, and her job was to get them to sit up. And she found that using the previous systems of simply doing sagittal sit-ups didn't actually strengthen the torso as quickly as if she used diagonals. And Laban did a lot of theorizing about diagonals and the spatial use of diagonals, the three-dimensionality of the body. And if she used intent in space, what he called space effort, in this case direct or indirect. So she would do things like invent games for the children where they threw bedpans at each other. And you can imagine it, children sitting up wanting to throw a bedpan with quick and direct is going to bring their bodies up, bring them into action and activity in an expressive way. And that work showed her how the Laban effort material could bring expressivity into the training on a body level of a performer. So Laban was looking at movement with Mr. Lawrence, F.C. Lawrence, and discovered that he divided the effort or dynamics with which someone did a task into weight, space, time, and flow. Weight is if someone used strength or lightness. Time was if they were quick or if they were very sustained in how they did the movement. Free flow was if there was a sense of lack of control. There was just a free flow, no control of the object or whatever the task was. Bound flow, which is usually what one needed in a factory, was where something was very precise and very controlled. And the attention in space was the fourth effort, which was being very unifocused or multifocused, or he called it direct versus indirect or flexible. So those were the four effort factors. And I think if you look at the dynamics, or in the system, the effort factors, you're actually looking at the expressivity of the person. Shape came in later with Warren Lamb, who said that if you have a shape, a big shape or a small shape, or a advancing shape or a retreating shape, that is also expressive. If you have a widening shape or a narrowing shape, that is part of the expressiveness of the body. So these elements all come together in the fundamentals and contribute to looking at a system of expressive as well as functional performance training. The fundamentals, the basic sequences, were codified in the early 70s when Irmgard had been teaching the material for about probably 8 to 10 years. And there were a group of us, Peggy Hackney, myself, Janice Forsich, who got together and said to Irmgard, please, let's get this into a system that will be transferable, teachable, trainable, because you have a lot to offer. And she rather resistantly, I have to say, said she would meet with us and discuss this. So we went down to my loft and we spent several months trying to get the sequences into some kind of theoretical order, some kind of system that made sense to us. I think we managed, but I think there are other things now that have come into it. Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen's work has added a whole sequence of patterning that is buried in the fundamentals, but it's somewhat buried. And after Bonnie studied with Irmgard, I think she teased out a lot of that material, which is why the modern use of fundamentals includes a lot of the BMC work. I have taken it on myself to train actors rather than dancers, and I find it wonderful because it gives me access to a very functional as well as expressive system. Not just an intuitive way of teaching, but a system and an analytic framework that my students can understand and use in terms of their development as actors on stage. The other thing about the system that I like is it can apply to a wide variety of human expression, emotion, and life. I've been a coach for Olympic divers, although I know nothing about diving, highboard diving. And I also work as a therapist, and the Laban system, again, is so able to articulate expressivity that when that ability to express oneself is damaged, which is the case in therapeutic contexts, there's a very functional way of working on those problems. So for me, it has answered many questions, although at the same time, as ever, with any good system, it's generated even more. In Irmgard Bartenieff and others' development of Laban's work in the United States, we look at 4 aspects of the body moving: body, effort, shape, and space. BESS for short. Body looks at actions of the body like level changes, weight shift, initiation, posture, gesture, body part relationships, sequencing, and phrasing. Effort, the English translation of Laban's word Antrieb, looks at the dynamics in terms of weight, space, time, and flow. Shape looks at the shape quality of the body as supported or not supported by the breath. And space looks at where the body moves in relation to the architecture of the space around us: vertical, sagittal, horizontal planes, 3-dimensional movement, or diagonals. Overall, our premise is, as Irmgard famously said, movement is not a symbol of the expression, it is the expression.
I've been working with different somatic approaches since the 70s. Through the years, certain ones keep coming back as points of interest. One is the work of Laban of effort shape and Bartinieff fundamentals. I do think in my work I often use Laban's space principles without necessarily intending to. It's something that's always spoken to me. So any of my work that might deal with falling in space, which is an image I often use, where you don't actually fall on the floor, but you move into a diagonal and you actually let yourself fly into it or begin a fall and go on. It's a sense of being supported by spatial planes and directions, and I think that comes directly from the work that I learned in the effort shape. One of the big principles that we worked with in improvising was motion, emotion, motion, meaning that to start something, not to try to say, oh, what am I feeling, but as you're going on, there's always a moment where you suddenly say, oh, I'm bored, or this is irritating to me, or I'm getting uncomfortable, and instead of stopping it, forcing yourself to continue until whatever is happening happens, and it will create a different movement, which will then create a different possible emotion, which will then create a different response. And working 3 or 4 hours a night just on that. Those who were working at that time in Alexandria were like floating princesses. And the Feldenkrais and the Bartinieff were so much more in the patterns of movement and in the, well, especially Bartinieff at that time, in the mobility of articulations, especially the pelvis. I think any of the release work has a fundamental sense of paradox. Once you take it at a more advanced level that allows you to marry opposites together, that you're not following a sort of party line. What's interesting to me is on a performance level is that you have on one hand all this baseline of information that is allowing you anatomically to be more mobile, less accident prone, but you have that foundation. And then using it more as a thought process of being more perceptive to what is happening around you, what you're doing, what the space is, that to me is still somatic approaches, but in a sense of enabling you to make more creative choices in your movement. I think that this work, for the same reason that I said in terms of the choices it makes you in performance, has a definite effect on at least your attitude socially and politically in dance. First of all, it's extremely, I wouldn't call it reducing, it's not the word I'm looking for, but there is a democracy in that I never assume that I know more than anyone else when we're questioning how to do something or we're trying to find new territory. We're all at the same level. That I firmly believe. I think there is a generosity of spirit in that work that has definitely influenced my parcours in dance and how I see it, how I, as a public, how I dance it, how I teach it. Being supported by spatial planes, I just love. If I could somehow be, again, not rooted and hanging out on some diagonal, I'd be at my happiest.